In this video, we will be discussing what role God's existence, naturalism, and basic beliefs play in an overall epistemology. Epistemologists have long since seen that for a belief to be counted as knowledge, there are certain requirements, and these vary from person to person, thinker to thinker. But one of them is that our beliefs need some form of justification, and typically this is derived from some type of inference. I'm inferring from one previously held belief to accurately and correctly to another belief. One insight, though, is that we can't do this infinitely. If every belief is inferred from previous beliefs, which are inferred from previous beliefs, this would result in an infinite regress, which wouldn't be tenable. So we find ourselves, section 1, in what are commonly called basic beliefs. These would be beliefs that are not inferred on the basis of other beliefs, but are held basically. They're held foundationally. They are at the foundation of other beliefs, but they themselves have no other foundation. Now, what Dr. Glenn Andrew Peoples points out is that for more kind of classic epistemology, people have held these to be certain undisputable self-evident truths like mathematical truths or the law of non-contradiction. But more recently, he points out, many epistemologists have been embracing an experientially based, properly basic belief. So Dr. William Lane Craig is one such proponent, and he says that a belief can be properly basic and based on experience if I exhibit no rational or cognitive defect in holding this experiential belief. So I, from my experience of my own memory, feel as though I remember, based on my experience, I remember that my keys are in my pocket. And so I can't spell out a syllogism for that. It's simply based on my experience of my memory. They're there. I reach my hand in, I find them there, or I don't, but that's a basic belief. It's not inferred from a secondary point. Why is this not inferential? Why is this considered an experientially grounded belief and not an inferentially grounded belief? As Dr. Tom Morris points out, these types of beliefs result in circular reasoning when you try to justify them. So if I try to prove to you that my memory is accurate, I almost inevitably look back in my memory to show a time when my memory was correct. I'm using memory to justify memory. So these have to be what we call basic. They can't be inferred, and they can be based on experience. Now, moving on to epistemology's first principles. Aristotle had this view that every special field of study had its first principle, its axiom from which all the rest of its study was produced. So for biology, you may have something to the effect of the axiom, some things are living. Very basic. But you have to believe that in order to believe everything else about the field of study in biology. He was looking for what is the metaphysical, in his study on metaphysics, book 4, he looked for what is the metaphysical first principle. And he did a phenomenal job of finding what is probably one of the first principles for epistemology. He posits, he says, this principle is a principle, to quote him, a principle which everyone must have who understands anything that is, that which everyone must know who knows anything. And what he's saying here is that this is the foundational principle that underlies all knowledge. What is the foundational principle? What is the foundational belief that underlies all knowledge? And he says this, it is that the same attribute cannot at the same time belong and not belong to the same subject and in the same respect. Or simply put, the law of non-contradiction. I highlight this because I believe this is one of a two-rail basis for epistemology. Epistemology is certainly based on the law of non-contradiction, the belief that some things are true and their opposites are therefore not true. But I don't think that this fully encaptures or fully undergirds every truth. In fact, I think it's, like I said earlier, a twin rail. Both of the two basic beliefs I'm about to lay out undergird every belief that we have. You have to presuppose the law of non-contradiction to presuppose this basic belief. You have to have this basic belief to understand or to presuppose the law of non-contradiction. So what is it? Well, let's go back to the first quote of Aristotle. He says, you must know the law of non-contradiction if you know anything else. What is he presupposing in that sentence? He's presupposing, and I think this is our second first principle, our twin first principle, that we are the sorts of creatures that have the ability to know truth. We, or put another way, we are the sorts of creatures that have rational faculties that are aimed at truth. I use the word aimed because this isn't to say that we have perfect rational faculties. Obviously, we're mistaken from time to time. But it's to say that at base, my rational faculties are not aimed at anything in particular except for toward truth. I am rationalizing toward truth. Sometimes I make mistakes. Sometimes we make misjudgments. But these two will work as our foundations. We have to presuppose that something cannot be true and false at the same time in the same way, and we have to presuppose that we have the ability to know certain things. If you don't know certain things, you can't know the law of non-contradiction. If the law of non-contradiction doesn't hold, then the belief that I can know certain things can be at the same time true as the sentence, I can't know certain things. Or I can't know anything. So both of these have to be presupposed in order for us to have any belief. These are our fundamental or basic beliefs. Part 3, the naturalism defeater. This part comes from a much more in-depth argument that I won't have time to get fully into, developed by Alvin Plantinga, called the evolutionary argument against naturalism. To give a very basic sketch of the argument, he argues that if naturalism is true, that this is essential, we have to presuppose naturalism to understand this argument. If naturalism is true, and we couple with that, we add to it evolutionary theory, contemporary evolutionary theory, then what we have is a defeater for any of our beliefs. It goes something like this. If we developed our cognitive faculties, our memory, our rationality, our belief-forming functions, if all of those are developed solely based on naturalistic evolution, no guidedness, there's no theistic component here or supernatural component, but if we are strictly speaking of a naturalistic process, then our belief-forming functions would be aimed at, if aimed at anything, they would be aimed at survival. They would not be aimed at truth. And anytime that they happened upon truth, this would simply be a happy coincidence, but rather what is happening is that our cognitive faculties are forming beliefs that will lead to our survival. I like to give the example of the skeptical squirrel. When I was a child, all I wanted to do was pet a squirrel. They just looked incredibly fun to play with. They seemed very happy. They seemed very soft. I didn't have a sense of germs and disease and how rabid they would be and how sharp their teeth would be. And so I just, I would crouch down, I would hold up my hands to show I wasn't threatening, I would hold out acorns, and the only intention I had to draw a squirrel towards me was to pet the squirrel, to feed the squirrel, have fun with the squirrel, play with the squirrel, let the squirrel go. The squirrel has a belief. Everyone I ever came across had the belief that I would do it harm. This was a great disappointment to me as a child, but obviously this provided a survival benefit for the squirrel. The squirrel has a false belief about my motives, but this may have led to the squirrel surviving. But let's assume that as a child I became too rambunctious while playing with the squirrel and I broke its little leg. I mean, they have tiny little legs. It'd be very simple for me to do. Or let's assume that I have some bacteria that I'm immune to, but the squirrel isn't. And because of this incident, we should say that the squirrel wasn't skeptical. He comes up, he plays, he contracts essentially the squirrel version of the bubonic plague, the squirrel-bonic plague, and he spreads it to all of his squirrel relatives. There's an 80% reduction in squirrels in North America. It's nearly genocide, right? It is because he was skeptical that he kept himself from the possible danger of the child and from the germs. He didn't have a view of the germs. He didn't think that potentially he would contract rabies from me. He didn't think that potentially I wanted to be sweet to him, but that I would hurt him. He has a belief simply that, incorrectly, that I desire to do him harm. But this maybe provided a survival benefit to him. In the same way, our belief-forming faculties, if naturalism is true, working on evolutionary theory, then all of our belief-forming faculties are aimed at survival. And I've heard naturalists make precisely this argument before. It's not uncommon to hear a naturalist argue that, well, belief in God has only been held by 96% of humanity because it provides a survival benefit. It does a relatively good job at inculcating a herd morality that typically helps us, propagate our DNA and survive. Assuming naturalism is true, then of course that's all our beliefs about God are. If naturalism is true, then that's all our belief-forming faculties are. But what is sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. If naturalism is true, then every belief I form is just as likely to have no more truth to it than the naturalist claim against my belief in God. Every belief I form, every basic belief I form, is not necessarily true. It's just that it helps me survive. Many false beliefs help us survive, and that's what all of our beliefs could potentially be if naturalism is true. We wouldn't have the ability to discern between which of our beliefs are aimed at survival and which of them happen to accidentally happen upon truth. And so what would happen is something to this effect. We'd have a syllogism that goes about like this. Proposition 1. If naturalism is true, then we should have a radically decreased confidence in the reliability of our belief-forming functions or cognitive faculties. Premise 2, naturalism is true. Therefore, we have no or significantly decreased confidence in our belief-forming faculties. So that would be the naturalism defeater. Point 4, naturalism's defeater. I think that syllogism can just be rewritten based on what we obviously know. Anybody's belief in naturalism that is sincerely pursuing truth, however strongly they hold to their naturalism, they say, oh, I've searched for 20 years. I've never seen evidence of the supernatural. I've read every Christian book out there. I've read every theologian. I see no evidence of God. So they feel very confident in their naturalism. There's no way to hold that to the same level of certainty that we hold our belief in our basic cognitive faculties. In fact, it's self-defeating. As soon as you believe in naturalism, it decreases your belief in your basic cognitive faculties, which in turn makes you doubt naturalism, because naturalism is one of the beliefs formed on your belief-forming faculties. So not only is it self-defeating, but we also hold to our cognitive faculties significantly more than we hold to our naturalism. So the argument should probably go something to this effect. If naturalism is true, same proposition 1, same premise. If naturalism is true, we should have significantly lowered confidence in our cognitive faculties. Premise 2, we should have confidence in our our belief-forming faculties. Therefore, naturalism is false. We always hold to our confidence in our ability to discern what is true over our theological bent. So, with that being said, point 5, what is a good fit? I think here we can take the opposite of naturalism. Well, the opposite would be supernaturalism. Supernaturalism seems to be a fine fit. It seems to be open. We are more than simply whatever naturalistic process produced us. Therefore, it's at least possible that our cognitive functions and belief-forming faculties are aimed toward truth. Therefore, supernaturalism is a decent fit. Theism, kind of a broad deistic theism, is a better fit because it posits the existence of a being that is itself a knower of truth, an all-knowing being. And so there is at least one set of cognitive faculties in existence that is aimed towards truth. So it makes more sense that we, small little, belief-forming functions or faculties, that we should have a similar ability. But to go even beyond just supernaturalism to the more complex theism to full-blown Judeo-Christian theism, this is a perfect fit. The Judeo-Christian worldview is that there is a supreme knower, an almighty, all-knowing God. And this God made humans in his image, which inherently entails that we would be knowers of things. It would entail to be in the image of an all-knowing being would entail that we would be knowing beings at minimum, that our belief-forming faculties would be at least sometimes reliable. Therefore, naturalism is a terrible fit to ride alongside a basic epistemology. The existence of God and the particular doctrines of Judeo-Christianity are a perfect support for our basic principles of epistemology.